And a very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and my special guest is the Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority, Senator Shanika Roberts-Odle. Senator, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
A pleasure.
Now, I want to start very basic by looking at the main roles and objectives of the authority.
Wonderful. So the BMCLA was created via legislation in order to regulate the medicinal cannabis industry. So one of our real main purposes and our core values linked towards being innovative and integrative. And that means looking at new ways to do things and looking at how we can bring every one of our shareholders along with us in the process. So we really look at how do you create this industry. We did a lot of work once the original act was passed on how do we set this up? What is going to make this go? What has been done in other territories all across the world? So we would have looked at what would have happened in St. Vincent and Jamaica, spent a lot of time looking through their legislation and speaking with those authorities on how did those processes really go. We also would have taken some time to look at Australia. We also would have taken some opportunities to look at California, to really look at how is everyone doing this across the globe, and then how do we make this work for Barbados? Because this isn't a plug and play kind of industry, right? Barbados has its own particular perspectives, right? Our particular value propositions that we have to make sure that we're taking into account. So a lot of that was the kind of work that we did, and henceforth our regulations came about. And how do we regulate this industry? How do we make this an industry that works for Barbadians? And not just from an industry perspective, but from a patient perspective. One of our values is being patient-centric. Yes, we want an industry that works. Yes, we want an industry that adds value to the economy. But we also want an industry that ensures that patients in Barbados are getting best access to the best products that we can possibly put out in Barbados.
And it's an industry that will obviously generate money as well.
It will generate funds. One of the perspectives that we have on this is we are to be an additional leg to the Barbados table, right? So the economy, there are various different aspects that make up our economy. There's sugar, there's tourism, there's the financial services sector. Barbados in no way is planning, cannabis, in no way is planning to take over all of these segments. But we want to add a leg to that table to continue to make sure that Barbados on an economic footing is sound and secure.
No, the authority is in charge of issuing licenses. There are several categories of licenses. I want you to dissect each one for me.
Sure, no problem at all. So there are 8 licenses, and that starts with cultivation. That there's cultivation, processor, transport, research and development, laboratory, import, export, and retail distribution. Now, retail distribution is requires a little explanation because it isn't just a retail distributor. What retail distribution represents is a therapeutic facility, right? And that facility allows persons to come in with their prescription, be dispensed by a pharmacist, and to use that on the premises. So it's sort of a medical spa, if you will. So you have some medical professionals who are there to ensure that you're using your product correctly and that you're comfortable with what you're doing. And there are very many ways you can use medicinal cannabis. Topically, orally, there's a lot of ways. So therefore, it provides a place for you to feel comfortable as a patient and for you to go ahead and be able to utilize your medicine, so to speak. If we go back to cultivator, so in a cultivator, there's several tiers of cultivator. Tier 1 is anyone who has an acre and under, and it continues to rise until we get to tier 4. Tier 4 is 25 acres and over, right? So they're tiered out to allow various people at various economic points to be able to tap into the industry and be able to utilize it. Processor is the same way. There are 3 tiers of processor. Tier 1 being 500 meters and under in terms of square footage as it relates to a processor. And then that goes up tier 2, tier 3.
What's the criteria if I want to apply for a license?
No problem. The criteria for a license is actually quite simple. one of the things that was done when they created the act is we looked at being as inclusive as possible. So if you're applying for a license, you have to, one, you can be a Barbadian, a person from CARICOM, right? You have to be over 18. You can apply for licenses if you are not. However, there are some requirements, and I'm not saying over 18 if you're not a Barbadian or someone from CARICOM, but there are some requirements attached to that, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But you have to have not been convicted of a, what do we call it? You have to, there's a list of convictions and crimes in the schedule that is attached to the act, and you have to have not been convicted of those. And those are really heavy crimes. We're talking about money laundering, we're talking about trafficking in humans, we're talking about intent to supply real large quantities, right? What we're trying to do is create an industry in which Barbadians who want to participate can, but also creating an industry in which it's going to be safe, in which we're going to be able to keep the perspectives as reasonable as possible. So Barbadians who may want to invest, may want to become a part of the industry, also need to know that this is not an industry that some people may have the perspective it's full of criminals. And it's not that. It's an industry in which we're trying to utilize something that was vilified for a great number of years. We're trying to give persons an opportunity to be a part of that who may have some smaller convictions associated with it, right? Because we have to make sure that at the end of the day, we're being as inclusive as possible, as fair as possible, and as transparent as possible. So some of the requirements when it comes to your licensing process is all of those things we talked about, but then you have to apply. Now, what we've done is we've created a completely online process for your application. So you go onto our website, you go to the application, and it gives you all the details that you have to be able to provide us with. So you fill out that long application form, and it has some details, and I understand it might be perceived as a little bit long,
Tedious,
right? But it's really important because it helps you, the applicant, really think about the various aspects of this industry and have you thought through all the various things you want to do and how you're going to do it, particularly when it comes to each license form. And the application itself adjusts according to how many licenses you're applying for. So it actually is very intuitive. When you come to the end of that application form, it will ask you for the various plans. So one of the requirements that we have is we ask you to provide us with a security plan. How are you going to secure this property? How are you going to take into aspects all the various possibilities that may happen? Two, we ask you for an operational plan. Have you thought through how you're going to do this? If you have, what is your plan? What is your plan for getting your products sold? What kind of products you're interested in creating? If it's only cultivation, how much land do you plan to cultivate? What kinds of strains have you thought about? And we understand that things will change as businesses change. Businesses themselves always have to ensure that they're responding to the market. But we want to make sure that you've thought it through and that you can explain to us so we can have a good understanding of what it is you plan to do. There's a premises plan. What is your premises going to look like? Where is everything going to go? And that in itself also links into security. And we also ask for a disposal plan. Depending on what license you're looking for, there will be product that you may have to dispose of. They may not have been up to standard. They may be the waste product. If you have a manufacturing plant that comes from a product that you've already created, you have all this waste. So what's your plan for this waste? Is it that you intend to do another product out of waste, which is entirely possible? If not, how are you disposing of this? And we have to make sure that you're disposing of it in a way that is safe and effective. It's not going to damage the environment, and then we're not going to have an issue later on as a country.
Now, I hear you regarding the criteria, that I've met the criteria, I've done my application.
Wonderful.
How then am I approved? How do we reach the approval point?
Not a problem. So one of the things we've committed to is a 4-month process. We've committed to a 4-month process. However, when you send us your application, you have to make sure that you have followed all the guidelines. So if you go to our website, that's www.bmcla.bb, you will see all the guides we've created. So we've created an application guide that takes you through the process of what it is that you need to submit and all of the information you have to have in all of those plans. So when you submit your application to us, we have an internal process that we go through. Someone sits and they look at your application, they make sure that all the details are done and everything is, all of the plans are there. And then we go through each of those plans. We look at, have you met all the criteria for all the details you were supposed to submit? Now, sometimes everyone doesn't submit all their documents, at which point we have to put your application on hold. We write to you, we say you haven't submitted your documents, you're missing a document, you have to respond to us within a certain amount of time. Sometimes your plans aren't clear enough. They don't involve enough detail for us to feel comfortable with approving them. So in other industries, what may happen is people will just say, you're not approved. We don't do that. That's not how we operate. We only succeed if you succeed. So what we do is we put your application on hold and we send you an email or a letter that includes all of the details that you have missed. And we ask you please to update your plans and send them back to us. Once you've done that, then we start the timer again. So if you took a month to do that, then that's a month that your application is going to be on hold from us. Once you send that back in, then we start our timer again and we say, okay.
Another 4 months.
No. We don't restart the timer. Apologies. We start the timer again. So if we had it for a week before we sent it back to you, then we start at, okay, week again. So that you aren't losing time. We aren't losing time, right? But it's really based on, did you submit your appropriate information? Was it complete? And did we have all of the information when we were able to check through it? And we work with you. As I said, we succeed when you succeed. So we want this to work. So once all of that is done, it is submitted to me. And I look through the report that is developed on you, because there are a lot of things that are involved in your application. Aside from all the documentation, we still have to visit your site because we have to make sure that what you have submitted to us makes sense. We've seen it so that we are secure. We've also done background checks on you. As I indicated, we aren't skew, we put the criteria about what you could not have been convicted of in order to apply to us, but we still double check. So if you're local, we check here with the police force as to tell me the criminal history of this person. If you're an international individual, we check internationally. We use an international background check service that really does a deep dive into these people to see what is their business history, what is their criminal history, what is their reputation. Because at the end of the day, for Barbados, we also understand that we are a safeguard, right? Barbados itself has a reputation. We have a position in the world. And one of the things I am adamant about, and my predecessor was adamant about, is that medicinal cannabis will not be the leg that fails as it relates to our reputation. So we do a lot of investigation into these persons that we're bringing into the industry. And nothing is ever fail-safe under the sun, but we do our very best to make sure that we've checked it. So I go through all that information. I go through that with my program administrator. I look through all the details. I ask all the questions that I feel needs to be asked and haven't been asked. And then once you are satisfied, I present that to the board, because the board at the end of the day makes the final decision. And we make a recommendation based on the information that we've received and based on the information that we have. And the board makes a determination as to whether they're going to give the license, whether they're going to pause because they themselves may have seen something they want more information on, or whether they're going to not issue the license. And I'm happy to say that today the board has not decided not to give a license at this point in time. So we've been really, really good about that.
Senator, I want to go back to looking at the criteria.
Yes.
You have to be over the age of 18, a citizen of Barbados, a CARICOM national, but you do make provisions, obviously, for international interests as well.
Yes.
So explain to me, because you were supposed to get back to that
point
was earlier.
Indeed. So as it relates to the Barbadian aspect of it, you can be someone with immigrant status or a resident of Barbados, all right? Those are two additional formats. So there are some entity-like allowances for your application. So you can be a partnership, a cooperative, or a company when you come to apply for your application. Now, that is the area under which an international person can be part of an application. They can be part of a cooperative, a partnership, or a company. However, there would need to be a 70-30 split as it relates to ownership. And what that means is they must be in a relationship with someone who fits the first criteria. They must be in a relationship. As a relationship, parts of the company must be 30% owned by a Barbadian, someone with immigrant status, a resident, or a CARICOM national in order for them to be a part of an application. So, and I want to be clear about that, because one of the reasons why we did that was to ensure that Barbadians were always enfranchised in this business. Regardless to whoever from the international community wanted to get a license, they had to have a relationship with a Barbadian. They had to get into a business relationship with the Barbadian. So a Barbadian can own 30%, 40%, 50, 60, 100% of any entity within this industry. However, if you are an international person, you have to have a Barbadian with you, and that person has to have real direct ownership of 30% of that company.
Now, going back to the licenses, they're for 5 years.
Yes.
And 60% of the total licensing fee is to be paid before the license is issued, with the remaining 40% over a specific period.
Yes.
And we know that some of these licenses are quite expensive. Let's look at the licensing fee.
No problem. So one of the things we did when we first established ourselves was we recognized that at the end of the day, we want Barbadians to be involved in this industry, right? Barbadians from whatever kind of socioeconomic background. But we had to make sure that we're making provisions for them. We had to make sure that we're making allowances and space for them to be able to operate. So we developed a series of circumstances, right? A series of initiatives that would allow them to be able to be part of that. So that 60-40 split is one of them. We recognize that you may not necessarily have all of the money upfront for your license, because the license fees, some may term them as high, but
some of them are.
And some of them are. That's the truth. Some of them are. And the reasoning for that is clear. We do, as a country, want to be able to make money from the industry, but we want people to be involved. And we had to balance those things out. So the 60-40, you could pay us 60% of your license when you are issued that license. 60%. The 40%, you can balance that over the next 3 years. And with some of the licenses, you'll see it's not a huge amount when you are able to pay it over those 3 years. So there's some licenses. So I'll give you an example.
Sure.
For instance, with a tier 1 license, which tends to be that sweet spot for locals who want to be interested in the industry, the overall amount for that is $29,700. It's a lot of money. But if you pay me 17, and when I'm saying me, I mean
BSRD,
17,820 of that, you then are allowed to take 11,880 and pay that over 3 years. So if you take that and you divide that up by 3 years, and then you divide that by monthly, because you can pay me yearly, you can pay us monthly, or you can pay us in total at the end of those 3 years. It gives you that wiggle room to be able to do what you need to do and to be able to start in the industry without having to have paid the entirety of the license. So as we go into the other tiers, there are other opportunities as you go through. So for instance, an import license in total is $5,940.
Not bad.
Right? Not bad. So what you would do is you would pay $3,564 of that, and the remaining $2,300, you would then pay that over 3 years. Same with the export license. Some of the other licenses are more expensive, but by allowing you to, one, put yourself in relationships with international members who may be able to add more funding to you, or by allowing you to create a cooperative. Cooperatives are a great way for locals to get involved in the industry. If we have 12 of us come together, each of us with $10,000, that's a lot of money to be able to say, okay, I can come into this industry. I can pull something together. I can pull a cooperative together that makes sense, that has our values, that we will be able to each add something to how we're going to be able to operate and get a license. And the cooperative department has been really, really helpful in terms of allowing us to be able to give that perspective to Barbadians. And we want more Barbadians to come into this industry. Cooperatives are a great way. Partnerships are a great way. This is not a situation in which you have to come by yourself. The more individuals who gather together, the more opportunities there are for Barbadians to become involved and invested. And the reality is we have Barbadians who have used those kinds of opportunities to become involved. And one of the things we are very, very clear about is that we try our best to be as transparent as possible. If you go on our website, every single step, every single document, every single opportunity is put there on full display for anybody who wants to be involved. And one of the things we also did was created a customer liaison officer, because we recognize that some of the bigger companies who may be interested can hire lawyers, they can hire project people to get through all of the documentation, and not everyone can. Yeah. So we recognize that Barbadians needed someone who can guide them through the process. And so we created a customer liaison officer, and her number is on our website, her email is there, you can set up a meeting with her, and she is absolutely friendly. And she is a huge advocate when it comes to our applicants who want to become licensees. And she will answer your questions for you. And if there's anything she can't answer, she's sure to walk into my office and go, I have a question. And we work with you. There are a lot of our applicants who would have had particular kinds of issues as it related to their location, as it related to the kinds of businesses that they wanted to go into. And we were able to guide them and to work through the process with them. So it came to a resolution that made sense for them and for their business.
And I want to question you a little later regarding the whole issue of transparency.
Not a problem.
But what category of license is attracting the most applications?
Tier 1 cultivator, most definitely. Tier 1 cultivator is a sweet spot, particularly for locals. That's what they're interested in. We're also getting our retail distributor, which is the therapeutic facility license, also a really good sweet spot. Some of our local business people are coming together and putting into that particular aspect.
In terms of foreign interest versus local interests regarding applications.
Yes. So the reality is we have a lot of local interest, and it's one of those things that sometimes blows my mind when we have conversations with people who may have a different interpretation. And I understand. I understand that you can only go by your interpretation. So one of the things we do is we try to put out more information. There's more local interest in this business than there is international.
Can you give me a ratio? That's what I want.
66%, sorry.
66% local
66%
versus
local versus international interest.
Okay. But that would also include the 30% in the foreign companies.
Exactly. Okay. And that's the reality. A lot that percentage also includes, foreign entities who have come in, but they always have to have their local aspect. So 66% totally local. That's what they're interested in.
And where's the authority in terms of the number of licenses that have been issued and those that are set to be issued?
Wonderful. So we have 2 licensees. In those 2 licensees, 8 licenses have been issued. 9 were approved, 8 were issued. And one of our licensees, looking at their business model, decided that at this point in time, they're going to take one of their license and they'll come back later for the other license. And that's an allowance we give you as well, because it's a business. And both of those applicants are local, right? So they looked at it, decided, okay, at this point in my business perspective, this particular license is going to be more useful to me right now, and I'll come back for that. So their first license was cultivation. So they wanted to start their cultivation and then come back for the other license later. And that's fine. It's a business decision at the end of the day, and we are here to regulate, but we're also here to make sure that you can succeed within the boundaries of the regulation.
where is the authority in terms of the number of licenses that have been approved, issued, and those that are waiting for approval?
Sure, no problem. So we have 2 licensees. Now, as a licensee, you can apply for multiple licenses or you can apply for 1 license. So one licensee applied for 2 licenses and the other applied for 7. Now, all 9 were approved. However, the licensee who applied for the 2 licenses decided to only take 1, and they have decided that they will come back for the other one and make the payment for the other one at a much later date. And I'll explain to you why. Because he's going to take advantage of one of the additional allowances we've made for the industry. So for the smaller cultivators, that tier 1, we have allowed to give them what we would term a blight. So we've allowed for your first importation. You don't have to have a license for your first importation.
Really?
Right? Your first importation, you can go ahead and import. And we're talking about seeds, tissue culture, plantings, or cuttings. You can go ahead and import that, all right? Doing the same documentation that you have to, because there must always be documentation. But you don't have to have an import license in order to do that. And that's an allowance we've only made for the tier 1 cultivators, right? Another opportunity for a smaller licensee to be able to get another advantage within the industry.
Okay.
So back to that. So what that internally means is that there are 9 approved licenses, 8 issued licenses, right? Further to that, I know that this is a concern. What we are doing is we put licenses before the board, as I indicated earlier. The board makes that determination, but then it is up to the licensee to determine how many of their licenses they're actually going to take versus what they may not be ready for within the course of their business model. And that is important because at the end of the day, it's a business and a business decision about how you operate.
Okay. Well, still a lot more to discuss, Senator. Stay with us. You're watching 1 on 1.
Keep it clean, keep it green. Barbadians, we invite you to get involved and play your part as we clean and green Barbados. Coming to your community with media launches, bulk waste collection exercises, community engagement sessions, and giveaways. Get on board. Let's keep Barbados clean and green. Beautiful, beautiful Barbados.
And welcome back. We're chatting with the acting CEO of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority, Senator Shanika Roberts-Odle. No, the government has made it clear that Barbadians will be a part of the cannabis industry's ownership structure. However, some Barbadians are feeling left out. One group in particular, the Rastafarian community, they feel as though they've not been given a seat at the table. How do you respond?
I respond by this. I understand. And I say I understand because I'm not a part of the Rastafarian community. So all I can do is empathize and understand with what they're feeling. Because it is very, very hard to know that you have suffered and fought for the right to be able to do something and then feel as though you've been locked out.
Correct.
What we have been doing is at every turn, we have tried our best to be inclusive. When we first started this out, we made sure we met with various members of the Rastafarian community, various representatives of the Rastafarian community. At every turn, we have tried our best to be inclusive. There is a member of the Rastafarian community who sits on our board because we don't ever want to be doing something in the dark. Therefore, the Rastafarian community can see at every step, because our board is involved in every step that we take, what it is that we are doing. And one of the other things we have done is we have put proposals before the ministry towards how we can do better at incorporating the Rastafarian community, and various proposals about how, we can invest them in an ownership way in what it is that is available within the medicinal cannabis industry. And we are still trying our best to go through however we can continue to include them. right? And we will not stop attempting to include them however we possibly can. We're attempting to include all Barbadians. So we have never, ever forgotten about the Rastafarian community. And while I understand that some may seem that what we've done so far is not enough, please understand that we are not stopping there. We are trying our very best to continue to put proposals, to put things in place, and to loop them in, and to make sure they're going with us on this journey as it relates to a medicinal cannabis industry.
I understand that the advertisement had nothing to do with the authority. However, there was disquiet recently about an ad that appeared for a master grower, and many were of the opinion that that doesn't apply to any Barbadians because we don't have that expertise here.
Well, I would argue that there may be expertise in Barbados as it relates to growing. It may not be a formalized expertise, but I'm sure that there is expertise as it relates to that. So no, it wasn't our ad, but we recognize that this was eventually what may happen.
Right.
So one of the things that we have done from the very beginning is that we were emphasizing training. When we started this out, we went ahead and we had a master grower from Israel come in, and he met with several members of the Rastafarian community and other members of society to kind of walk them through how the international community views it as it relates to the cultivation of medicinal cannabis. We continued as it relates to developing programs. We have done several online webinar series about cultivation, about how do you go about doing that to a standard that meets the international standard. We actually worked alongside the Technical and Vocational Institute, TVET, as it relates to creating standards and a curriculum for teaching cultivation for medical grade cannabis. And we have level 2 and level 3. And right now, we are in the process of finalizing an arrangement with one of our technical institutes in Barbados that they will be able to teach that standard, right? To ensure that Barbadians can have that certificate that says, you know, I am trained to do this. And I know that there are some Barbadians who have been doing this for a long, long time. And I absolutely understand that. But the realities of the situation is if we're going to do this to an international level, if we're going to be meeting GMP and EU GMP standards, which are the standards as it relates to exporting, depending on what territory you're planning to export to, then we need to make sure that we are taking into account how we do this. One of the best examples I've ever had is that when you look at an Advil, each Advil you take, there's a formula.
Yes.
Each Advil you take, when you look at the back, it tells you exactly how much is in, when you look at the back of the bottle, it tells you how much is of each chemical is in that Advil. And if there were to be a recall, there are codes that would allow you to go right back into which batch of what chemical was included in that Advil. Medicinal cannabis can be no different because we want this to be recognized as a medicine. Therefore, we have to meet that kind of standard. Therefore, there has to be records about what have you put into this plant? What did you spray the plant with? What fertilizer did you use? It has to be batched and referenced, and you have to have records because that is the level of standard that we're dealing with, and that is the level of standard that must be maintained. So we have done our very best to ensure that there are training programs that we have been developing to be able to put something in place, to be able to have those Barbadians who have that skill that we talked about, be able to have that formalized certificate.
And you don't want to tell me the institution that will be offering that?
I don't want to just yet. I want to just make sure that we've settled on our arrangement and we've signed all the relevant documentation. And I have to leave something.
That's fair. Going back to the standards, the authority is working with the Barbados National Standards Institution as well.
Yes, we did work with the Barbados National Standards Institute as it relates to packaging and labeling for products that are developed in the industry. And someone from BNSI was actually included on the committee that helped to develop the TVET standards. We had persons internationally and local persons who sat on that committee because as with everything we want to do, well, we want to meet international standards. We also have to make sure that the local context is understood and respected in the development of what it is that we do. So those two standards are done, they are developed, they are ready to be able to be taught.
Going back to the issue of transparency, which I promised that I would grill you on. Persons are concerned that there's still not enough transparency regarding the authority and the issuing of licenses, who they're going to. But we understand that you have non-disclosure agreements in place.
So the non-disclosure agreements are in place based on safety purposes. The legislation itself ensures a significant level of transparency. I cannot issue a license and not put that information in the Gazette. The Gazette is a document that is available to all Barbadians, right? One of the things we also do is when we issue licenses, we put out press releases that say this is the company that we've issued the license to, these are the licenses that we've issued. The reality is, and one of the reasons why there's a safety component, is that every time that we have had an article posted as it relates to medicinal cannabis, there's been a number of persons who go and they speak about raiding that farm and finding those people and burning down those fields. And the reality is that these licenses and these applicants are people. And so far, they're Barbadians. These are our brothers and sisters who deserve as much protection as you and I. So one of the things that we have been clear about is we will issue the name of the company, we will issue the licenses, but we will not put people's names in public because we are a small society. And the reality of the situation is that we want to be able to offer them at least this level of protection. But we're very clear and transparent. The reality is these licenses are issued. We are clear to tell you, well, they're Barbadians. We are clear to tell you, company names and what licenses, but we can't risk persons' safety from this perspective. And I'm sure as time goes on, Barbadians will understand. And I'm sure we understand that because we care about each other. That is who we are. So while we understand there may be some feelings about that.
Of course.
Right? We're all human. We're all going to have feelings. We have to ensure that we're protecting our applicants.
And I'm simply playing devil's advocate because you're telling me you're issuing the name of the company, you're stating what the license is, but I don't know who are the principals behind that company. Do I know that they're Barbadians for sure?
Well, one thing I can tell you is that by virtue of what we do a lot of background checking, a lot of deep diving into who these persons are, and they must give ID. We then double check through the police and through various other methods as to who this person is. So we can tell you that they are Barbadians. And I understand that that may not be enough for some
people. That's right.
But the reality is that I see myself as the guardian at the gate. I am here to make sure that this industry flourishes. I'm here to make sure that we are doing the very best that we can to make sure that Barbadians have an opportunity. But that's a two-way street. So as I indicated, I still have to protect them as well.
Now, we can't talk about the medicinal cannabis industry and don't talk about the healthcare sector. I realized by looking at your board, you do have 2 medical doctors sitting on your board. Has there been buy-in from the doctors, the pharmacists, the nurses for medicinal cannabis in Barbados?
As with everything, there has been building. We would have done our very best. As I indicated earlier, we met with a lot of these stakeholders very early in this process. And the medical community would have been a significant stakeholder in this. We would have done an IRB study. And we went through various medical practitioners to kind of look at, what they thought about this, what they were willing to do, how they plan to integrate that into their particular practice. And one thing I can say is that you will have persons who are on board and some who aren't on board. But what I find is that more and more medical practitioners are coming on board, more pharmacies are coming on board, and there are a lot of nurses, I find, who are very ready to look at medicinal cannabis and to be able to integrate that into their treatment of individuals. one of the things we have 2 medical persons, we also have a pharmacist on our board. And those kinds of perspectives have also helped us in how we relate to the medical community and how do we share information. And the medical community themselves, because there is a great advocate we have out there, that's patients. Patients are important. There are a lot of patients who have taken the time to research medicinal cannabis. They felt their pain. They felt all of the various issues and side effects they have from other kinds of medication that they're taking. And their position sometimes when they go to their doctor is, look, I've researched this. I want to try this. And a patient is their own best advocate sometimes, because that then forces a doctor who may have been, a little less interested to say, okay, let me take some time. Let me look into this. And then I will determine whether or not I feel that this is best for you. Because that relationship is important between a doctor and their patient. And we have tried our very best to stay out of that relationship where we can. Even in terms of the information we are allowed to have. We're not allowed to have patient information. Even in terms of pharmaceutical information, we're not allowed to have that. And I speak in terms of anybody who goes and gets their medicine dispensed by a pharmacist. That information isn't shared with us. Because at the end of the day, that relationship must be between the doctor and the patient. It's why we haven't stopped doctors from dispensing or prescribing medicinal cannabis for any kind of treatment. In some countries, they have a particular very short list of things that you can be prescribed medicinal cannabis for. And in order to change that list, they go through years and years of back and forth. We have decided that we want Barbadian patients to have the best care possible and the best access to medicine possible. So your doctor makes that determination with you, and you guys go forward from there.
And my reason for asking about the medical community, because it cannot work without them. My understanding is a medical practitioner needs to write that prescription, and that prescription needs to be filled by a pharmacist. So you need the buy-in.
Absolutely. And I can understand from the medical practitioners, some of their kind of, cautious nature about it, because this is, and it's in the kind of formalized way that it is being included. This is new.
Yes.
And so they have to make sure they're protecting their patients, and patients have to make sure that they're advocating for their opportunities. And we are just here to make sure that the product comes on the market, Barbadian made, checked, rechecked, tested to make sure it meets standards and is made available to Barbadians.
No, specifically those involved in the treatment, I should say palliative care. Mm-hmm. Are you getting interest from that subsection?
Yes. The reality is, when you are at that palliative care point, I personally believe that every kind of allowance should be made for you. Absolutely and completely. And the doctors and nurses who have to deal with palliative care on a daily basis have been on board, and they have been advocating, and they have been issuing. And I think because it's not done in a big splash where no one puts up a big billboard saying, I've issued medicinal cannabis. Yep. Some people may have been missing that. But next time you walk into your pharmacy, take a look, ask a question. And for those, as I indicated earlier, who need it, speak with your doctors. We have a really good relationship with the Ministry of Health and, of course, the Drug Service. When we are looking at creating an MOU, we're just waiting to sign the MOU with them that kind of sets out our relationship and how we're going to work together to ensure that the industry is exactly what it needs to be for the betterment of Barbadians as it relates to the medicine aspects of those things. And we never stopped our engagement with the medical community. Next year, for our anniversary in January, we will be having a forum in which to talk about how things are going, how do they understand the industry and the medicines, and to be able to continue to provide education from those who would have used it for various kinds of treatments and to be able to put that information before the medical community, before the pharmacists, the nurses, and the doctors. So that is also very much part of our mission, to educate as we move forward, to be able to move the industry forward, and to make sure that Barbadians and our various stakeholders come with us.
Now, since you introduced your week of activities for your second anniversary, what else do you have on the cards?
So we're going to be having an open house. What that means is that various persons who are interested in applying, persons who are already applicants, anyone really can come through and sit down with each and every department that we have and ask various questions. Anything that you really wanted to know about the medicinal cannabis industry, you will be able to do so at that point in time. In addition to being able to call us whenever you'd like, or call our customer liaison officer. So we want to be able to open our doors, full transparency, ask whatever questions you're interested in. We'll also be having an industry event, and that will be a place in which we're going to create a space for our licensees to talk to applicants coming through the pipeline, for persons who want to be able to market to those persons, for various partners and stakeholders throughout this process to be able to interact and to be able to talk about where we've come into the industry and to be able to talk about where we want to go. I am very excited about where we are going, and I'm very excited about the opportunities that are in place. We have spent a lot of time pulling together this industry. Even before our regulations were out there, it took a tremendous amount. This is not something that has existed in Barbados previously, not in a kind of formalized industry kind of way. And it took a lot of time for us to sit down and understand the lay of the land, understand what happens in other jurisdictions, understand how that needs to happen here. And we started out with a really small team. I believe there were only 5 of us when we first started. And there are not that many more of us now. I think there are only 10 of us at this point in time who do all of the heavy work and heavy lifting as it relates to this industry. All of the research, all of the stakeholder engagement, all of the application kind of work, and all of the compliance work. Because at the end of the day, we are a regulator, which means we have to meet with our licensees. We have to do all the relevant inspections. We have to make sure that they are complying. And we have to make sure that we are meeting the needs of this industry as stated by our act and by our regulations.
And you want to work with these schools as well.
And we want to be able to provide education. And it's one of those things I want to be very clear about. When it comes to working with the schools and working with the National Council on Substance Abuse, we want to make sure that we're making the distinction. I had a really great conversation a few days ago, and the question was asked to me with a younger person. I say younger because I'm not old. With a younger person, and the question was asked, you're going into this industry about something that we're all told to stay away from. And it proved to be that we need to be able to speak to them, because we have to be able to address what they may view as a hypocrisy. We have to be able to educate them about how we're doing this, why we're doing this, and why this is a medicine for medicinal use at this point in time, and how we want them, or the National Council on Substance Abuse, may want them to be able to be aware of the distinction and the difference.
My final question.
Sure.
I know you have several tiers regarding the cultivation license, and in some instances, quite a bit of land is being used. Now, there's always been the concern that we're taking land out of agricultural use, we're using land for housing. Now we need land for medicinal cannabis. Are you having support from the Ministry of Agriculture, one, and then from small farmers?
Well, we fall under the Ministry of Agriculture, and the minister has been supportive about this particular industry. And we have always been interacting with the ministry itself to make sure we're on a good setting and good formulation. Now, by no means is our intention to take up arable land for cannabis cultivation. It's absolutely not true. I am a Barbadian and I need to eat just like everyone else. So that would never be my intention. The reality is we are not interested in that. We are interested, as I said earlier, in being another leg to the table of Barbados, which means there is some land that we will use, but it is not our intention to take up all of the arable land. And most farmers aren't intending to do that. This industry requires land. It requires inputs, yes. But by no means would the Ministry of Agriculture ever let that happen. The Ministry of Agriculture right now is on an absolute cultivation kick, and it's not about cannabis. It is about food. It is about filling that deficit that we Barbadians have. We import a lot of things that we can make here. And the Ministry of Agriculture is about working with farmers. It's about identifying the right markets, and it's about identifying and increasing the significant production of food in Barbados.
But you do have enough access to land, is what I'm getting at.
We have enough access to land. One of the things that applicants come to us with their land identified, right? Most of the time they have their land identified. So it's not necessarily a situation in which we are attempting a land grab situation. For us personally, the BMCLA, we don't have any land as an institution. Government has land, and when needed, we do request usage of land, but we've never had to do it before, and I don't anticipate us having to do it in future.
Well, Senator, thank you so much. This has been a very informative interview. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this evening.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. That was the Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority, Senator Shanika Roberts-Odle. I am Lisa Lord. You are watching 101. Do have yourself a wonderful evening.